Thanks for clicking on Conversations with Crosswinds Counseling. I'm Curtis Smith, and I invite you to subscribe to our podcast and to like and share it as well. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Conversations with Crosswinds Counseling. I'm your host, Curtis Smith. It's our brand new podcast. We're so excited to sit down with a therapist each week, and today we are with Brendon Lengacher. He is in Fort Wayne, Indiana, a master's level therapist. Brendon, thanks for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Let's talk about men's health today. We're both men,
Yes.
stating what I hope is obvious. And it's something that is an interesting topic because more and more I think you're hearing a little bit about this, but this has kind of been, I mean, let's be honest. As men, we don't love going to the doctor. We're not going to be the one that usually signs up for seeing a counselor.
Yeah.
We're more stubborn. We're maybe a little less open to doing things that help us than women are. And
Absolutely.
so it's become a topic that we talk about a little bit more, but historically men are not good at this.
Absolutely.
Are you seeing that starting to change though?
I mean, I hope so.
So no, you're not seeing it yet.
I think we are seeing some of the shift because I think we're at a spot in society where we can't not address it anymore. And so I think out of necessity, it's kind of like with the doctor analogy, like, well, I guess if I broke my arm, I better go in. Like, I can't avoid this for much longer.
Right.
So I think that there is an uptick, but not necessarily out of desire to. Maybe it's more out of necessity.
So the stereotype in my mind is that so many times the women in our lives, whether it be your mom or your wife or a sister or somebody, is probably going to be the one that's historically pushed men to, hey, you broke your arm, go see the doctor. Hey, you really should see a counselor. Hey, you should do this.
Yeah.
Is that still the case, or do you think more and more men are starting to embrace, hey, I broke my arm, I should probably do something about this?
Yeah, I think that's still one of the driving factors.
Yeah.
And thank goodness for women doing
Right.
that, pushing men to go
Right.
seek out help in that way. But I think with some of our corporate contracts, making it more available in the workplace and hearing other people say hey, other men saying, yeah, I went to counseling and it was helpful, kind of taking that stigma away. So
Yeah.
I think that as some of the clients I've worked with, whether they've told me that they've gone on and told their coworkers hey, you need to go do this. This was a really good experience. Or hearing from their coworkers and going, yeah, I came in because so-and-so told me to come in.
That's really powerful. And again, stereotypically, probably something as men we don't do naturally, and probably something we should do more to help others, right? Because when we do that, I think we have this fear, oh, I'm going to look like I'm weak or I needed help, and that's not manly and strong. But really, it's about helping other people, letting them know, hey, this worked for me, this helped me, this might help you. It's a healthy perspective.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that I've found in working with men is that society tends to give a lot of don'ts. On the more social media perspective, you'll hear things like, don't be toxic, don't be aggressive, don't do this, don't do that. But then living in a more Midwestern culture, we'll kind of hear the opposite message of, don't talk about your feelings, just suck it up, just don't do this, don't do that. And so in working with men, I think the difference is if we shift it from a don't to a do, that's where I've started to see some of the changes where men will come in because they feel more empowered. This is something that's beneficial because there's nothing wrong with me and I'm coming here. There's something valuable about me and that's why I'm coming in.
Right. So when you're in counseling with a man and you're taking that perspective of, hey, society's giving you a lot of don'ts, let's focus on some positives and some things you can do. Is that something that really is resonating with your clients and the people you're working with?
Yeah, I would say it resonates a lot. That tends to be one of the biggest pieces of breakthrough because I think when we're getting a lot of these competing messages, the tendency is just to shut down. It's I'm just going to show up and do my best. I'll do the bare minimum. I'm not really going to try and step out because if I do, I might get slapped with this label or I might get told that I'm bad because of this. So I'll just do the bare minimum. And giving a do, I think, the idea that I've kind of stuck with is purpose gives energy, and energy is where we really see men step forward into things.
That narrative you were just describing of society might label me as this, and more it is difficult to step out and to kind of be yourself, and there you do run the risk of being categorized or labeled and put into a box. And I don't know, in our society today, that's more of a risk. So how do you get men to offset that? As the risk goes up, it seems like men especially might be more likely to become more and more safe and conservative and not willing to step out.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think that it's kind of getting to this bigger purpose, because if we can help men start to realize and understand that, men showing up has societal impact.
Yeah.
And I think one of the biggest misconceptions with mental health and then men's mental health would be that, well, we're kind of headed towards a crisis. I think we're neglecting to recognize that we're in the middle of the crisis. And if we look historically, there's plenty of stories where when there is a crisis and men take the opportunity to step up, that's where we see lives changed. That's where we see lives be saved. One of my favorite stories of this would be back in the Blitz in World War II. All of your functional men, I guess, were out fighting.
Right.
And in Britain, they were being bombarded, and they didn't have enough people to run the ambulances and the fire trucks. And they basically went to these institutionalized men and said, hey, we have no other option. Will you step up and do this? And men that had been basically comatose, probably very depressed looking back now, got up and went and ran the ambulances and the fire trucks.
Wow.
And so that's a very intense example, but I
Yeah.
think if we can help make the connection that what you're doing in your normal life really does matter, it's not exactly the same. Thank God we're not being bombarded, or that we're not at a war that's that risky, but if we can help make those connections, because the little things do matter.
And I think men and women, I think all of us want to have a purpose in our lives. So when you can paint that picture for men, I assume that really resonates with people.
Yes, it really does.
Yeah.
And I think that's where you start to see some hope and some energy start to show up for the men in counseling, because there's a path forward now. It might not be the easiest path.
Yeah.
It might not be fun.
Right.
Because they often recognize there's this big obstacle in front of me, or sometimes it feels like you're walking over broken glass to try and get to the end of the path. But knowing that there's that purpose there, on some level, it doesn't matter what the obstacle is. You can move forward because you can see the goal.
Yeah. For a man out there who's watching the podcast who's been thinking, gosh, maybe I could see a counselor, but hasn't taken that step yet, what would you say to that person who's been on the fence, who's been thinking this could be helpful, but I don't know, there is a stigma, I don't know if that's for me, I don't want to be weak, I don't want to appear weak? What would you say to that guy right now?
Yeah, I would say there's a difference between weakness and vulnerability, and we don't tend to recognize those two things as different. Being vulnerable does not mean that you're weak. It just means that you are showing that you are not perfect.
Yeah.
It means showing a little bit of your heart and recognizing that, yeah, I am going to get hurt in life. Life is full of suffering.
Yeah.
And so just because I'm a guy doesn't mean that I don't suffer. Whereas I think sometimes when we try to share about things, or we try to talk about things, this idea of weakness comes in, and weakness would kind of imply that we don't do anything with our problems. But I think vulnerability, if we can kind of reframe how we think about it, vulnerability is a path forward into a strength of some sorts.
Yeah, the ironic part, I think, is I think you have to be strong to be vulnerable.
Absolutely.
It takes power and strength to step into a situation that causes you to be vulnerable. And that's the ironic part. We think of it maybe as weakness, but it actually takes strength to get there.
Yeah, it's a little ironic how that works.
Right. Brendon, great conversation. I think one we need to have more openly, more publicly, more often, because again, as men, we often aren't great about all of these things, talking about our feelings, stepping into a vulnerable situation, doing something that we fear might show weakness. So Really appreciate the time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Brendon is one of the counselors in Fort Wayne at Crosswinds Counseling. The best way to connect with Brendon or any other counselor is go to crosswindscounseling.org. And, of course, you can keep watching Conversations with Crosswinds Counseling. We'll have a new podcast dropping every week, so we will see you next week. Brendon, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Have a great day. Thanks for watching Conversations with Crosswinds Counseling today. I hope it was helpful for you. Don't forget to subscribe so that you don't miss an episode. Like and share it as well. We appreciate that and hope you have a great day.